Radio Cairo, FM 95.4. The Voice of Egypt.
It's exactly 4 in Cairo. It's now time for Word of Info. Yes, back again, and we have the pleasure today of having Her Excellency Ambassador Sandra Deval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation. Hello and welcome to Word of Info.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's really very kind of you to come and squeeze some time for us in your precious time. I know how busy you are in Cairo, and that's what we're going to communicate with our dear listeners of how busy is the European Union Embassy in Cairo, the great work that they're trying to achieve with connections and communications with the Egyptian government and the Egyptian people, helping to improve the fraternal relations between Egypt and the European Union. Ms. Sandra Deval has had a degree of law and philosophy, and she also has a master's degree in the international relations. This kept her busy in her very colorful career, where she worked for some time in the European Court of Justice and then entered into the European Union Commission, especially in the free competition in Europe from 2001 to 2006, where she was helping to shape up the honest competition between different companies, so that preventing companies from doing any monopoly against the consumers in Europe. And this, of course, is a tough job, helped very much with her degree in law. And then she had a slight, and I call it a slight, shifting career, because she went to foreign service also in the European Union and served in the mission of the European Union in Tel Aviv, Bangkok, and now in Cairo. And definitely since 2009, the Lisbon Treaty, things have changed dramatically with the foreign service of the European Union. All about the European Union today, we have the pleasure and honor to have you with us, Excellency, and really thank you very much for having the time to come with us. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, and I hope I can shed some light on the complex animal that the European Union is.
Definitely, because the EU is a political and economic union that has almost all of Europe. Geographically, with 28 states and 510 million people, it has 24.6 of the nominal GDP. This statement is so true, but at the same time, it's a very difficult dream to form, because these countries all share geography, being part of Europe, but every country has its own language almost. There are 24 languages that separates these people, and it has evolved from a small economic and customs union to a large union that tries to connect its member states also in non-economic ways. How was that possible?
Well, that was possible basically, unfortunately, because the main incentive had been the very war-driven history of Europe. We had been in war on the continent for the larger part of the preceding centuries. Of course, the very poisonous cherry on that cake of wars was the First and the Second World War.
Yes.
So after the Second World War, we've been lucky enough to have some very visionary politicians who really wanted to make sure that the acrimonious relations that were the result of the First World War would not be repeated and lead again to tension and a Second World War, and rather to create a new cooperation between those that had won the war and those that had lost it. And also to try and make sure that the very strong economy that Germany had, and which had allowed it to basically finance its war machinery, would be used for peaceful purposes in the future. So thanks to those visions, which were expressed at the time by Monet and later by Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, and which is why we celebrate Europe Day on the 9th of May, because 9th of May 1950 is when he came out with this kind of declaration about a future of a joint Europe.
And this 9th of May, if I may interrupt, is almost the day of the end of the World War II in Europe, because it's almost 7th to 6th
yeah,
May.
It depends on the different countries.
Yes,
when
in Europe,
yes.
It was the final. It's 5 years after the end of the war.
Yeah.
So 5 years with the start of an idea of unification between the defeated and the victorious countries. This
Exactly.
is very tempting to discuss.
And it was incredibly brave because, as you imagine, the destruction in Europe was very widespread. So for people to put this forward was very revolutionary, I think. And we have to be eternally grateful from doing so. So the first step was a coal and steel community, because the idea was to bring those main generators of economic power under a joint authority rather than leave them in the hands of the specific member states.
The Alsace and the Lorraine idea.
Exactly.
Right?
So Germany, France, joined with that was also Italy, and we already had an existing customs union in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, which had been joined together for quite some time already. So those 6 countries started out what eventually has become a 28 member state strong European Union.
So it was a long journey, because as I remember in the 70s and the 80s, it was always saying, as we say it in Arabic, the سوق الأوروبية المشتركة, meaning a market.
Right.
The European communion market. So nobody said the word union.
Exactly.
It always said it's a market.
Right.
So how come the change happened, and why it took some time?
Well, it took, first of all, the first changes that happened were the expansion of what was first a European economic community purely. So we had first extensions towards the south, Greece, Spain, Portugal, the UK had joined before, Denmark, Ireland, and then later on the countries to the east after the wall had come down. So for a long time the focus indeed was to create all of these economic links and to create a very big market in which both goods and services, capital and people could move freely. So that was the original idea. With that came, I think, bigger ambitions, but also the realization that if you want to have an integrated economy, it translates into many things. If you have a Swedish person that wants to go work in Portugal, but they have paid their social service contributions in Sweden all the time, and they go to Portugal and need to go to a hospital, they should be able to enjoy those same benefits. So a lot of the policies that needed to be developed to actually make even a purely economic union work became quite political in nature. But overall, it was the idea that indeed we want to be more than only a common market. Of course, with time and with the community growing and also integrating countries that did not have a democratic history or tradition, the political element became more important. Also, when we are looking into how the European Union positioned itself in the outside world, it was a strong economic actor, but with that came the ambition also to be a stronger political actor. So all of these things came together. Of course, at the expense, it was with variable degrees of success. At some point, ideas of defense union were put forward. That was then too ambitious for some, not for others. So obviously, the more widespread, the more encompassing and the more ambitious your goals may come, the more difficult it is to keep everybody on board for the same project. It's easier to all sign up for let's have a free market than to all sign up for let's do many other things together. But again, it's quite hard to have one without the other. If you're going to have a free market, you need banks to function under the similar kind of circumstances and the similar kind of control mechanisms. So a lot of these issues become inherently very political.
This is very difficult because with all the bitterness that was in the history of Europe, with all the fights and wars, there were definitely important persons or important people and human beings of flesh and blood who helped very much to make this dream come true. We can always remember Adenauer and de Gaulle as a start, because these two countries had Germany and France had a lot of animosities between them all through the history. So it was up to these two great men to mend the relations, and also Kohl and Mitterrand, and also the Belgium attitude, or to have things placed in another country, not in the biggest country of them all, not to be put in Germany, not to be put in Europe. The headquarters are put in Belgium, which is, of course, with all due respect, a purely European country. I know it's your mother country, and you definitely have to be biased, but I'm also biased towards Belgium. But the idea is that the choice of putting the union over there, or putting the headquarters over there, and helping people to get together, I think it needed a lot of human being efforts, because humans are definitely have a lot of things that can put them away more than that put them together. How that was possible?
So we've definitely been held by a number of visionary leaders throughout the years. At the beginning, also people like Winston Churchill, even though the UK didn't join from the beginning, people in Italy, but also later on, for instance, after the major economic crisis in the early 80s in Europe, Jacques Delors was a very important Commission president who came with new ideas and a new impulse to come as a solution for that economic crisis, not a further fragmentation and return to national reflexes, but on the other hand, return to a stronger push to create that common market and create more jobs and more economic power. So I think again now the European Union does remain very dependent on a very strong friendship between France and Germany. That the Angela Merkel Macron duo, for instance, it is still many of those dynamics that can help the European Union evolve further. But of course, the picture has become much more complicated with now 28 members rather than 6 members at the beginning, and with countries with very different histories and traditions. But when any member state or when any country expresses the ambition to become a member of the European Union, it does need to sign up on the same principles that exist that are shared between the European Union member states, which are both principles in terms of institutions, the strength of your democracy and the rule of law, but also the capacity of your institutions and your economy to actually be a member of that common market. Which goes from the quality of your food safety authority to the quality of the independence of your judiciary, for instance. So it's extremely widespread.
So the remains the important question is, what is the mechanism of EU policy making? I mean, this is really, as you are getting more into details, I find that this is very difficult. So it's a very big task to how to make the EU policy making possible, right?
It is definitely not an easy thing to explain in 2 minutes, because considering you could spend a whole year in law school studying the details of all of that. But depending on the subject or the subject matter, there is a different degree of delegation of power or competence from the member states towards the European institutions. The bigger picture, however, is that about 4 times a year, the heads of state or government come together in the European Council and they set the major political guidelines for the European Union. Next to that, you have what is called the Council of Ministers, and the Council of Ministers comes together in different formats. So you have the Council of Agriculture Ministers, you have the Council of Defense Ministers, you have the Council of the Justice Ministers. So these ministers come together and discuss issues within that specific competence. So this is where the member states are represented, and it's there where the main decisions are being made as to where we go ahead with the European Union, in which fields and how we do this. The European Commission, which is the biggest institution in the European Union, which has its permanent officials working full-time for the European Union, has as a main task to implement that legislation, to basically turn these political decisions into reality, which means that the Commission has the right to come up with proposals for legislation. They say, for instance, what do we require in terms of standards for a food safety authority if you want to make sure that your products can circulate freely within the European Union? It has to do on every single field. It can come with proposals which are then adopted or not by the Council, or in discussion with the ministers are afterwards changed. So there is a big machinery happening in Brussels, which does give people often the wrong idea that there is indeed a big anonymous machine coming out with all this legislation. But the dynamics are such that all those proposals that are made by the European Commission are tested and tried and discussed with the member states at different levels, be it at working level up to the ministerial level. A very important actor in all of this as well is the European Parliament. So the European Parliament needs to sign off on a lot of European legislation, and very importantly also has the power of the purse. So of course you can decide on lots of politics and policies, have proposals for implementation, but somebody needs to make them happy, and it usually costs money. So the budget is decided between the Council, again between the member states and the European Parliament. And there it might be, for instance, if the European Parliament receives a proposal and it says, the Council, the ministers have decided that fighting youth unemployment must be a serious priority. We feel that this is not reflected by a sufficient budget allocation. They can turn that budget back and have the homework redone again until the Council and the Parliament agree that the money is allocated the way it should be done.
So it's a long plan bureaucracy, but with a lot of democracy inside.
It is, yes. So the democracy is not always that obvious to the average citizen, but it is definitely there. And again, in terms of how far competences are devolved towards the European institutions or the European Union, varies very much. I mean, you've briefly mentioned my career in the institutions. When I worked for the European Competition Authority, this is an authority that has the basically absolute authority to preserve free competition within the member states, or for every trade that crosses the borders. So there, when we take decisions to open a specific case against, for instance, price agreements between companies, we do not need the approval of the member states concerned to do this. On the other hand, in my current field, foreign policy is purely based on unanimity between the 28 member states. So no decision in terms of external relations can be taken without the 28 member states agreeing on this.
We have to talk about the foreign policy, but I think after the break.
Yes. So back again, word of info, and you can call us at 257-89407. And today we have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Sandra Deval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation. So back again, word of info, with us today, Mrs. Sandra Deval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation, and Dr. DrAmr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University.
So before the break, we were discussing the role of the EU Foreign Service. It's kind of new, and suddenly I find myself having this great information that out of the 192 member countries of the United Nations, the EU has 139 missions in these countries, in 139 countries, which is a huge number. I don't think that other countries or even superpower countries have this big number of embassies all over the world. So what is the role of this huge EU delegations all over the world? I believe definitely it's not a political issue, but it has a lot of things and meanings. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, with pleasure. So yes, indeed, we have 139 delegations across the world. In a number of countries, we are present in two ways, because we might have a delegation in an international organization. For instance, we have a delegation of the European Union in UN with the UN in New York, whereas we also have a European Union delegation in Washington, so accredited to the USA. The reason why we have so many delegations is that whereas normally a country will open an embassy in another country because it has important political or economic links with that country, or historical links as well, the European Union has, since it started opening delegations a long time ago, been present mostly as a provider of development aid and financial assistance. So the criteria to open were quite different. It was not only the importance of political and trade links, but also the importance of being present to be able to provide development assistance. And that's how we've ended up having such a very wide network. So in some of the countries where we are present, there's only 1 or 2 or 3 member states that are also present. In other countries like Egypt, all of the European Union member states have their own embassies, with exception of Luxembourg. So it varies greatly. Now, the role, you have asked me about the foreign policy making of the European Union. So the role of these delegations reflects this and has changed over the last years. Whereas within the European Union, I've talked before about this Council of Ministers and the ministers really being the heart of decision making. Every 6 months we have what is called a rotating presidency. So every 6 months, one other member state of the European Union basically is the locomotive of that train of decision making. So right now, for instance, this is Austria has assumed this responsibility for the second half of this year. Now, this is all fine when it comes to making decisions that concern Europe within Europe, let's say. But it was fairly confusing for a third country, as some would say, ministers would say, if I need to talk to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Europe, who do I call? And one of the reasons to change this was to create, through the Lisbon Treaty, which changed in many ways the decision making in different fields for the European Union, but also in foreign relations, was to sort of decide that we would have a permanent European Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is within the system called the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, and we would also have a permanent service attributed to that person. That service already existed. So when I started my career in external relations for the European Union, I was working on relations with Jordan, based in the headquarters in Brussels, and I was doing this in what was one of the ministries, let's call them, of the European Commission. Now, when this change was made to appoint a permanent minister, the idea was to create a foreign service that would integrate much more the national member state diplomatic services and the European one. So at that point, since that time, basically 40% of all the staff working in that European External Action Service, as it's called, are people who come originally from national diplomatic services. Other people, like myself, have always had a European career. Now, the fact that we now had a foreign minister for Europe, let's say, and that we had this permanent role for the European institution was also reflected in the delegations. The European Union embassies, if you like, across the world are called delegations. We have the status of embassies, but we just go by a different name. So basically from one day to the other, and this happened when I had my first posting abroad in Tel Aviv, whereas I would go as a political officer to meetings that were run by my Spanish colleague who was managing this rotating presidency, from one day to another, it was the European delegation that was actually entrusted with this task of trying to bring together the member states present in a third country around common policies towards the host country. So that is a very important task of the European Union delegations across the world, is the coordination of the member states in its policies and positions towards the host
happens
country.
At the level of the delegates and the embassies, delegations and the embassies in the country itself, or all of it happens in Brussels?
There is a mirror image between these two things. So in Brussels, we indeed have a whole system in place where all of the member states have a representation with the European Union, and the representatives of those come together again from working level to ambassador level to prepare the work of the foreign affairs ministers. So the real basis of European Union foreign policy are the joint decisions of the foreign affairs ministers of the member states,
which are made in Brussels, more or
which
less,
are made
after
in Brussels,
meeting, whether it's
yes.
biannually or whatever.
It's monthly. The Foreign Affairs Council comes together very regularly. Now, the decisions that are adopted in that, it's called conclusions, the Foreign Affairs Council conclusions, are of course not invented on the spot by the ministers. They are prepared by this machinery where both people who work for the European Union permanently and people that work for the different member states in their embassies in Brussels already come with proposed text and proposals for instance, is there been a military coup in a country, which happened, for instance, when I was posted in Thailand. At that point, both in Brussels and locally in Thailand, we were trying to see with the member states how we would respond to that in a joint matter. So that is an example of how that works. Locally,
and after that, sorry for the interruption. After that, these issues, such critical issues, have to be seen by the European Parliament as well.
No, these issues are not seen by the European Parliament. The European Parliament is a very independent organization in many ways, and for instance can come out with statements which reflect its own positions and which do not necessarily have to be 100% aligned with what the Foreign Affairs Council conclusions have said.
So if, for example, they condemn whatever action done by a country, a third country other than the European Union and the European members,
right.
Maybe the European Union Foreign Service are not going to discuss anything in this topic, and the European Parliament would come out with a statement anti or with.
It might be discussed, but they might come to different statements.
Or different
so, which indeed sometimes can be problematic, because also individual members of European Parliament can come out with statements which are often, especially by the foreign press, who I understand cannot always see the forest through the trees with this whole institutions.
Yes, this is very important.
Say a headline, the European Union has said this, when actually it can be a member of European Parliament. Or
we have seen that, by the way, after our own revolution. We have seen
I'm not surprised.
Yes.
So
it was always, as we say, different messages with different information, and sometimes it leads to a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding, right? Yes.
So if you really want to look at the source of what the European Union agreed position towards a third country is, what you need to look at is the Foreign Affairs Council conclusions. So you could Google Foreign Affairs Council conclusions, European Union, Egypt, and Google will tell you, give you the right document where you can find the latest on what the European Union ministers have jointly agreed as a position towards developments in Egypt, for instance.
So when you are working in Thailand, for example, or in Tel Aviv, and you are monitoring the things that happened in the decision of the council, and trying also to bridge any differences between your colleagues and other embassies, right? More or less.
It's very much a chicken or egg kind of situation, because as you said, the foreign affairs ministers take their decisions not out of the blue. So actually, as the delegations, together with the embassies in that specific host country, your job is, of course, to provide good reporting on what the situation really is in the country.
The ground,
what the situation is, what the sensitivities are, which are the important personalities, etc. So our work is very much to help prepare those policy decisions as well. We are not just there waiting to see what comes out of it and to implement them. Our role is very much both, upstream and downstream from these big policy decisions.
And so you always meet with your colleagues from other embassies, for other European embassies, which is of course is an ongoing process, right? More or less.
Every month the ambassadors meet together, at least every month, but we have a regular system where every month the ambassadors meet, every month the deputy ambassadors meet. So that's a meeting that I chair every month.
So it's two meetings, not one meeting, because
it's many more. We have the economic councillors who meet, we have the development councillors who meet, we have the consuls who meet as well. So we really have a coordination on all of the different aspects in which we are active as a delegation, but also the embassies.
So this gives us the idea that you are very kind to come in our program with all the business going around. I mean, this is very difficult.
It's picking up again as of next week.
Yes, of course. So I think we have a break, because we have to talk about the EU foreign aid, because it's a very important pillar of cooperation between the EU and 139 countries that you have delegates in, right?
Yes.
So, back again, World of Info with Ms. Sandra Deval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation.
So, we're talking about the foreign aid, because 139 countries, you have delegations over there, and you are providing a lot of foreign aid. I mean, there was a statement, which is a huge statement, saying that the foreign aid that's supplied by the European Union almost reaches 7.3% of the world population, and this is a huge amount, or 68% of half of the development aid, more than half of the development aid given by any economic organization or any country is provided by the EU. So tell us about this foreign aid policy.
Okay, so yes, as you said, across the world, the largest donor is the European Union. We provide worldwide 60% of all official development aid. The United States provides around 24-25%. So we are indeed very present as a donor. Development aid can take several forms, of course. In some places it's development aid. We also have humanitarian aid, where we intervene in humanitarian disasters. Specifically in Egypt, we have a bilateral program. We have a whole complex picture of bilateral programs, which means between the European Union and Egypt. We also have a number of regional programs where Egypt, together with other countries, benefits from European Union programs. And we have lots of thematic projects that again have a reach that is bigger than just the geography of Egypt. Specifically between European Union and Egypt, there is an envelope of around 110 million euros each year, where together with the Egyptian authorities, the European Union delegation identifies projects and priorities in Egypt that it wishes to support with this.
So in what sectors, if I may ask? I mean, health, education, or whatever?
Education, we do a lot in water, for instance, water management, energy as well. We support, for instance, the establishment of the wind farms. We very often support the development of national strategies and programs. So the idea of European support is to support the country in the priorities it has set for itself. So often our first point will be a national plan for development, for instance, or a national strategy of a given country.
For example, our president was very much interested in two arms of development, and these are education and healthcare.
Exactly.
So if you may give us an example of what the European Union is doing in any of these fields.
Okay. In education, for instance, we are helping to provide training, but it can be very simple things. For instance, we are present in providing in a program where we want to encourage people to send their children to school rather than keep them away or have them work at home by providing free lunches or grocery vouchers to families. So whenever the children are being sent to school, they are provided with a free lunch or a free snack, and vouchers can be given in that sense to compensate for the revenue loss that those families might have by sending their children to school rather than having them work in the household or,
I remember
outside.
The Indian experiment in that was, or experience was, it was told to me by the ambassador of India. It was Mr. Sanjay. He said to me that when they did this program in one of the governorates in India, they found out that the attendance of the children became 120% because the children brought their younger siblings with them.
Right.
So I believe this food thing is very intelligent. I mean, it really can help in supplying, especially a good amount of nutrition, which is very helpful for the development of the child himself.
As well, indeed. But very often what we try to do is to support. As we've mentioned before, everywhere in the world, implementing policies costs money. So what we often do is, together with the authorities, is to see what are the policies that they would like to see implemented. Where is it that we can be helpful? This can be, for instance, by bringing in European experts to work with the Egyptian ministry for any period from 3 months to 2 years, maybe, to help them develop certain strategies or certain policies. Have field visits, but also just provide money into a budget so that the government can do that work. We do also a lot of what we call blending, which means that we combine loans with grants, with the idea being that the provision of money will leverage private investment or investment by bigger international financial institutions. And if you put all of that together, the European Union plus the member states, international financial institutions leveraged by European money, we actually come to an ongoing portfolio of 11 billion euros of basically European generated money that helps Egypt develop its economy and its policies. Again, it's sometimes we don't have in the European delegation. So where I work, we have a lot of people who are project managers, but we do not go out there and implement the programs ourselves. We always look for local partners. That local partner can be the Egyptian authorities, it can be local authorities, it can be a UN agency, it can be civil society organizations, depending, of course, on what you are trying to do or achieve. So this goes from providing training to women working in factories who want to start developing their skills and start their own businesses or move to different positions, to that kind of things, from providing financial assistance for big infrastructure projects, such as a wind farm, for instance, wind energy farm. So we are, through our partners, but with our support, present in many sectors within Egypt. And there is a big misconception that I often hear, that people think we are here to talk constantly about rule of law, governance, democracy, and that we forget about the Egyptian citizens' daily life. But that is not the picture at all. It's only about 6% of our aid that goes into issues such as governance, civil society. We have between 40% and 54% each that goes into development of sectors like energy, SMEs development, promotion of employment, etc. So the very large part of our support goes into helping to improve the socio-economic conditions of the Egyptian citizen.
The clean energy projects, the wind farm that you have just mentioned, I think this is very interesting field, because we have certain areas like in Jabal Zayt and other areas where definitely wind farms are one of the best solutions and options and favorability in these areas. How far are you helping in this field?
I can't give you a number on the top of my head. We are. I know that we are working with you in the.
I'm just saying that you have been working with this field for quite a long time.
Yes, no, definitely. And the wind farms, the two wind farms in the two Gulf areas are two examples of that. But we've also helped to work, for instance, with the ministry in developing the programs and strategies to increase energy efficiency, for instance. So again, a lot of our work is on the policy level. Again, that depends on the country. Countries that are less developed, we might have to be present more in building infrastructure and in getting those basics right. With a country like Egypt, the cooperation is very often in supporting with our expertise Egypt in the development in its policies. And of course, when it comes to green energy, climate change, etc., Europe and specific member states in Europe are very much leading the way globally. So we have a lot of expertise there to help develop these things in the best way possible.
The European Union has been also the delegation here has been present here since how many years? 10 years or something like that? Since
No, much longer. I should know this, but I think, was it the 70s, the early 80s? But we've been present here since the 70s.
As a community, as a European community or a common market at that time. But the embassy, I think, was inaugurated after the Lisbon or something like that?
No, basically the office is the same office as it was before. It just had more competences after Lisbon.
Name,
I think you might be thinking we had a change of locality. We moved from Mohandesin to the Nile City Towers after 2014 and had an inauguration there. But our presence has been continuous and uninterrupted for several decades already.
So it's I have noticed that there are a lot of things to talk about the European Union. So after the break, we'll discuss more about more information about Egyptian and European Union communication.
Yes.
Okay.
So back again, word of info, and with us Mrs. Sandra Deval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation, and Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University.
Well, of course, the European Union has a lot of cooperative fields between Egypt, or the Egyptian government, and the European Union delegation here. I think we have wastewater management, small to medium enterprises support, and of course a lot of issues to solve as regards the trade obstacles between the EU and Egypt. Tell us about that, please.
Right. So within the delegation, European Union delegation, we have about 85 staff, and the large majority of them are working indeed in project management. So I have colleagues who work indeed, as you mentioned, in together with the Egyptian authorities to set into place solid waste management programs in the governorates, different governorates across Egypt, the management of wastewater, and also to see how wastewater can be used, for instance, in agriculture. We do a lot in terms of trying to support the development of the economic sector, job growth, job creation. Hence, that's why we also support the competences in small and medium enterprises. Another example, for instance, next week we will be hosting a workshop where we're bringing European experts to talk about the food safety standards, the sanitary, phytosanitary standards that Egyptian agriculture exporters need to respect, so they can export their goods to Europe.
Yes.
So what we are trying
This will solve a lot of trade obstacles, right?
It's not necessarily trade obstacles. It is the rules of the game. It's just like European exporters that want to export into or import into Egypt need to satisfy the criteria that Egypt has set for the products that can circulate on its territory. We have the same as well. Trade obstacles are more when we talk indeed about, we have agreements on free trade between Egypt and Europe. on both sides. Sometimes that can be, protectionist reflexes, legislation that might be adopted on either side to protect national industries, etc. And those things are very much part of an ongoing dialogue between trade councillors of the European member states and the delegation and the Ministry of Trade here, for instance, mostly to try and make sure that such trade obstacles do not appear against some kind of protectionist tendencies. But yes, so the creation of jobs is very important to us. We, for instance, now also are trying to work on, for instance, the rights of disabled people, for instance. So we really are present in many different areas of social and economic life here. Trade, you mentioned trade obstacles. The European Union is the biggest trade partner for Egypt. So, of course, on both sides, we have a major interest in making sure that that flow of trade keeps on going very smoothly. There has been a serious increase of trade of Egyptian goods towards the European Union in the past years, especially in agricultural goods. So things are really on the right track there. And I said a lot of our support is really working on the basis in Egypt to make sure that can continue to grow into an ever more prosperous economic relationship.
So before I think we finish our program, which is very interesting because I think you have helped very much to shed a great light on the European Union delegation in Egypt, which is not interested as everybody thinks in just politics. It's much interested in 96 or 94% of its work in economic and other fields of cooperation between Egypt and the EU. Why was the EU awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012? I know it's old news, but definitely when you read it, sometimes people say, oh, maybe this is a bit biased or something like that, but I don't think it's biased. Tell us about that.
No, I think at the time when people were raising questions or eyebrows about this, and a lot of people talked about the war in the former Yugoslavia when that Nobel Peace Prize came, and underlining how the EU had not been able to be, to help that prevent or help that come to a peaceful conclusion more quickly. But actually, if you look at the award by the Nobel Prize Committee, it is very clear that the Peace Prize was awarded to the European Union because it brought peace within its own borders. That through the European project and bringing everybody together, we have created an area of peace and stability of now over 60 years,
so
running up to 70 years.
Of World War II, or a war like World War II or World War I is hopefully will never happen.
That has been always the idea, and we of course hope that will continue to be the case. And it's an important lesson, which I'm afraid with time passing seems to be increasingly lost on some people, that peace cannot be taken for granted. It is being taken for granted, I think, maybe now, because this is now the second generation that can grow up without experiencing war. And we have forgotten that is in the luxury that our grandfathers and even our parents did not have. My mother was born on the eve of the start of the Second World War, for instance. My generation and the generation of our children have never known war, and tend to forget that is something incredibly special and very important to preserve. And the Nobel Peace Prize was allocated to the European Union precisely for creating that safe and peaceful space within Europe after all those years of wars.
I think this now can be very clear to almost 70 years without war in Europe. Of course, avoiding to mention what happened in Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia was then a member of the European Union, and it's not still, right? So
I know, Croatia is, but yes.
So I think we are coming to the end of our program, but definitely we have a lot of information, and you may please kindly promise us to come again to discuss more about the European Union, because it's for our listeners a new prospect and new window on a great partner of Egypt in trade and education and health and a lot of other issues. Really, thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you. And by this we come to the end of Word of Info. Today we had with us Mrs. Sandra Duval, Deputy Ambassador of the European Union Delegation, Dr. DrAmr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Dua Muhammad was at the controls. I'm Najla Naguib. See you next Thursday, same time, same station, FM 95.4.